So, as we talked about earlier this week, those who are still Republicans overwhelmingly still support former President Donald Trump. The numbers, thinking back to the Monday show, something like 80% of Republican voters still view Donald Trump favorably. Something like 70% of Republican voters want Donald Trump to run for president in 2024. That's not the problem. Increasingly, the problem for the Republican Party is that there are fewer and fewer Republicans left. And what I mean by that is that the number of Americans who identify as Republicans or as independents leaning Republican is down to just 40% as of the first quarter of 2021. Now, on the other hand, the number of Democrats and Democratic leaning independents is up to 49%. That's a 9-point gap, 49 to 40, for Democrats and Democratic leaning independents over Republicans and Republican leaning independents. This is now the biggest Democratic advantage that Gallup has measured, dating back almost a decade to the fourth quarter of 2012, when Barack Obama was reelected. And this is something that Gallup measures regularly. And what Gallup has found is that there are some very specific reasons why so many voters have abandoned the Republican Party. I don't think any of these are particularly surprising. Number one, Joe Biden winning the 2020 presidential election and being inaugurated just after the humiliating and disastrous January 6th Trump riots has pushed millions of people away from the Republican Party and either towards being independents or towards the Democratic Party. The expansion of coronavirus vaccination has helped move people away from the Republican Party. The passage of Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID stimulus package has moved people away from away from the Republican Party towards the Democratic Party. Now, to be very clear, this is not the biggest gap we've ever seen between Republican and Democratic registration. If you go back to sort of the 2006 to 2009 era, Democrats actually had a double-digit advantage in registration there. If you go back further, almost 30 years ago, in 1992, around the time of the election of President Bill Clinton, Democrats also had a double-digit advantage at that point in time. So this is obviously very bad news for Republicans in theory, if it translates into how people vote in 2022 and 2024. But we should temper our expectations. And there's a few things to keep in mind here. First of all, in a country where often half the country doesn't vote, or, if turnout is really high, 35% of the country still doesn't vote. Having a 9-point, a 10-point, a 12-point party registration advantage doesn't necessarily win you elections. If you're looking at it from the Republican perspective, having a 9-point party registration deficit doesn't have to lose you elections, depending on who actually goes out to vote. But we can actually control that with turnout. If we get out the vote, then we can turn that a party registration advantage into a real world benefit. There's a bigger problem we can't control, which is that within states, you have such outrageous partisan gerrymandering right now that was done by the Republican Party, where just to win half of House seats, Democrats need significantly more than half the votes. And that is also a real problem for the Democratic Party. But probably the most important takeaway here is we've been saying that Republicans have launched more than 250 voter suppression bills across more than 40 states because too many people voted in 2020. The results in 2020 were proof to Republicans. We didn't do enough voter suppression. We need to suppress more vote. And that's why they are now filing and pushing more than 250 voter suppression bills. There's another aspect to this. This party registration data, Republicans seeing we are hemorrhaging voters. We are seeing attrition of Republican voter registration. That also is making them realize we have to suppress more votes. We have to pass some of these 250 bills. The Republican Party believes that when they are winning, it's a free country and they're winning because they're winning the battle of ideas. But when they're not winning, this is a socialist, tyrannical, authoritarian nightmare executed by communists such as Joe Biden. And they will do anything they can on that basis to win elections. Now, one last thought here. Just because there are fewer Republicans gerrymandering aside, voter turnout aside, just because there are fewer Republicans doesn't necessarily mean that a lot of those former Republicans are going to go out and vote for Democrats. They may not vote at all. They may no longer be Republicans, but they will still vote for Republicans when they see who it is that's on the ballot. Unless you can turn this registration deficit or margin, depending on which side you're looking at it from, into election victories, into political victories, they are merely interesting numbers. Now the question is whether Democrats can actually do anything with it. If you ever feel like you just don't have enough time to read all the books you want to read, you have to check out one of my favorite apps called Blinkist. Blinkist takes thousands of popular nonfiction books and distills each one down into an ebook or audiobook that you can get through in just 15 minutes, where you're getting all the key takeaways from the book. Just imagine how you'll be able to expand your horizons and knowledge by being able to soak up all of the important insights from 10 different books in an afternoon. Obviously, it's perfect for exposing yourself to a new book you otherwise wouldn't have time for, or you can use it to revisit a book you've already read, or use it to preview a book before you buy the full version and read it. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.